What's next for human spaceflight from Brevard? Who's working now at Kennedy Space Center? Anybody? And could a couple of recent calamities involving private space companies affect the launch business here? I'm Matt Reed from Florida Today. For answers to those questions and more, we sat down with Florida Today's own space expert, reporter James Dean. Watch for his upcoming coverage of the Orion capsule launch from the Cape. Watch. James, thanks for joining us on the show today. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on so much that's been happening in the news regarding space. Let's start first with the big one going on at Kennedy Space Center here, and that is the Orion capsule that's going to be tested this month. What's up?
Yes, coming up, currently scheduled for December 4th, NASA hopes to launch its Orion exploration capsule. That's the capsule they hope will someday take crews to deep space destinations to be determined.
Could be the moon, could be Mars.
An asteroid is probably the the leading candidate for an early mission now. So they've been working on this spacecraft for years. It's never actually flown. So the idea is to finally get it launched. It's going to be a relatively short flight, just 2 orbits, about 4.5 hours, and they'll get some early data to try to test their design and see if improvements are necessary before a crew might launch, which is still quite a few years away, maybe 7 or more years away.
They want to make sure that it holds up to reentry and all of the pressure of launch and that kind of thing. So, again, no people on this one. It's launching from Kennedy Space Center or Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. What are some of the details there?
Exactly. It's launching on a Delta IV Heavy rocket, which is a United Launch Alliance rocket.
Okay.
And its pad for any Delta IV launch is 37 over at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. So that's sort of a reminder that Kennedy Space Center is not launching, or NASA is not launching its own rockets just yet. They are still modifying one of KSC's 2 pads, 39B, for what is called the Space Launch System rocket. That's a very big rocket that NASA hopes to launch Orion on the next time for the next test flight. Again, without people, a flight now anticipated probably not before 2018. We'll see how it goes. But that rocket is still under development. The pad is still being worked on along with a host of other ground systems that is kind of KSC's primary responsibility to provide. So with those systems still years away, NASA, actually Lockheed Martin, which is the lead contractor for Orion, contracted to buy this rocket from United Launch Alliance, the Delta IV Heavy. And so technically Lockheed is kind of in the lead on this flight. They're executing this test flight. NASA will take all the data and evaluate that, but exactly right. It's a Cape Canaveral launch until such time as KSC and NASA's own rocket are ready to fly.
So what would be a success for this? I mean, just to have the thing come back and splash down. It splashes down, correct? It doesn't land on land or doesn't soft land. It's Apollo style.
Yep, very much so. They'll discuss that the capsule actually looks very much like an Apollo capsule. It's just significantly larger, in part because it can carry at least one more crew member. And so, the main purpose of this test flight, which is actually called Exploration Flight Test 1, or EFT1 is the acronym we'll hear a lot, or the hashtag, if you will, is to set up a reentry of Orion through the atmosphere at approximately 20,000 miles an hour. That's approximately 85% of the speed of what a return from the vicinity of the moon would be. So, along with multiple systems, including eventually the parachutes, the kind of the big test for the mission is the heat shield. It's a very large heat shield, said to be the largest ever built, certainly for a human-rated craft. It's an ablative material that kind of flakes away as the heat builds up to close to 4,000 degrees.
Wow.
The same thing actually that was used during the Apollo era. So a successful flight would be seeing that capsule actually survive the reentry, chutes open up, splashdown in the Pacific off of Baja, California, I believe. Bad flight would be some sort of serious flaws found with the heat shield that presumably would add time and cost to getting ready for a crewed flight.
Now you're going to be covering this. You mentioned hashtags earlier. How is digital communication and the web and social media, Twitter, Facebook, how has that changed how you cover launches?
We've for a long time now, we've done countdown chats that people can follow online now on their phones as well. And so it's just sort of enhanced that a bit by adding obviously tweets into the mix, so that we want to make sure obviously people who are out and about hoping to watch the launch know what the status of the countdown is. And so it's nice that we have a way to kind of reach people directly to make sure they know if the countdown is on schedule, or if there's some issue being worked, or what the weather forecast is. And so we kind of mix all that in together with sort of the social media stuff there, as well as, again, people getting a chance to sort of talk to me or amongst themselves as we do the countdown chats, and often offering expertise about the mission that they may
So
bring
kind of
to it.
constant two-way communication, like we did before, just on the website, but just through more channels. Wherever people are getting their updates, and if it's scrubs and they're on the beach, they can beep, they can get they can
Exactly.
know.
Yep.
They can know.
As soon as our fingers can type it, we'll push it out there.
Now, I know you've said something about this Orion capsule before, and it just raises a good question, is if this is the craft that's supposed to be carrying people to the moon and Mars, can it land anywhere yet? I mean, have they designed a system for that yet?
No. This is the craft that enables them to live in orbit for the period of time. Right now it's a few weeks, actually, about 21 days. So any mission that's contemplated right now and sort of within the next decade is about a 3-week mission. But obviously, if you want to put boots on the surface of the moon or anywhere else, you need a lander. That's a hugely expensive piece of hardware that really is not in any budget at all at this point. So that's one of the reasons why, probably the driving reason why, the mission that NASA is studying now and promoting as sort of the next major exploration mission is going to an asteroid. They call it the Asteroid Retrieval Mission, I believe. ARM, that's the one where a robotic spacecraft would attempt to grab either a very small asteroid or a piece of a larger one and move it into the vicinity of the moon's orbit so that a crew can go there, not just once actually, but potentially multiple times. It could be there for a very long time. And so that would basically give Orion a place to go and a crew a place to go that's sort of doable within this, the duration of a mission they can support, and without having to actually do a very difficult, expensive thing like landing on the moon or elsewhere.
So they wouldn't land on the moon, but they would be able to spacewalk and get out and climb around this asteroid, check it out, see what's on there, ship off some pieces.
You'd have like a docking mechanism from the vehicle that captured the asteroid. The Orion could then dock to it. Astronauts could get out, do some work, collect samples, bring them home. Yeah.
Well, I know that it doesn't get some of the patriotic juices flowing for some people, but I think that would be pretty amazing. Let's talk about what's going on in the commercial side of things. Orbital Sciences recently had a bad day up in Wallops Island, Virginia. Now they're looking at how they're going to fulfill their contract with NASA. What's going on?
Right, as you noted, Orbital had an Antares rocket blow up just 15 seconds or so after lifting off from Wallops Island there. So that was a complete loss of their mission, which was to deliver cargo up to the International Space Station. They're one of the 2 commercial providers NASA's contracted with. Orbital launching from Virginia, SpaceX from here at Cape Canaveral. So the rocket, the Antares, well, they're still investigating the cause, but they've already implicated the some very old engines that they happen to be using on that rocket. They're known as the AJ-26, which is a refurbished, kind of updated engine that was actually originally built in the 70s in the Soviet Union then for a program that never got off the ground. So acknowledging that these engines may not be reliable, they may not be able to rely on these engines for missions that will follow. Orbital has announced that they're going to speed up a replacement of that engine, still to be disclosed what that's going to be. As well, they need to make significant repairs to the launch pad there at Wallops. The rocket didn't get very far, impacted the ground with a spectacular fireball, and
looks pretty badly burned up.
It's well, obviously could have been much worse. There was damage, and the latest I've seen is that they think it could take about a year, maybe up to $20 million or so just to get the pad ready. So, wow. Orbital's under contract, to deliver this cargo for NASA, and what they've said that they intend to do is to fly at least one, maybe two missions of this Cygnus on a different rocket.
Okay.
So not on the Antares, but somebody else's rocket, for which they've said there's 2 U.S. companies and a European company that they've been in discussions with. So logically, that would likely be SpaceX and United Launch Alliance on the U.S. side, both of which would launch IS cargo from here at Cape Canaveral, and the Orion 5 from their spaceport.
And that's in Guyana, or
French Guyana, yes,
okay.
Kourou. So there's a chance that one or more additional ISS cargo missions will launch from the Space Coast here as a result of Orbital trying to recover from this mishap. Once they're ready, they'll go back to Virginia and keep going from there.
This kind of begs the question, but if they're coming to United Launch Alliance, if they come to United Launch Alliance, and the United Launch Alliance launches Atlas rockets, Delta rockets, NASA's going to put its Orion capsule on one of these to go. We know that one of these, is it the Atlas that launched the Mars probes?
Yes.
They can get a pretty good load of stuff out deep into space here. Why not just use United Launch Alliance from the start? Instead of building a next terrific. I mean, I'm not trying to be a shill for this local company, but it seems like they have pretty proven technology.
Yeah, ULA, the Atlas V could be the next to launch, either that or SpaceX's Falcon 9 could be the next to launch astronauts up to the space station. For Orion, a large, very heavy vehicle, and whatever crew it's carrying, what they've said is that they need a more powerful rocket, basically. This Delta IV Heavy, which is much more powerful than say the Atlas V that was sending a Curiosity rover off to Mars. It's good enough. It's going to be powerful enough to get this Orion test version of Orion fairly high, about 3,600 miles up higher. That's, for a little bit of context, that's 15 times farther than higher than the International Space Station flies. And so, even though there's nobody on it, that's still the farthest a spacecraft designed to carry people has flown since sort of the Apollo era.
Okay.
So it can do that mission, but to get further, you're going to need a more powerful type of rocket. So there's certainly has been and will continue to be significant debate about whether NASA should have proceeded with this big rocket development, or whether it would have been as good and more cost-effective to upgrade one of the existing available rockets. But directed by Congress, they are developing this SLS rocket,
which is huge, right? I mean, it's a big rocket. Is it as big as the Saturn rocket?
Not quite. Initially, it's 321 feet. I'll get scolded if I get the Saturn height wrong. I think it was
about
360 feet. But the SLS is, again, a program that's intended to evolve into larger and larger vehicles over time, such that you could launch eventually. NASA hopes as soon as the 2030s a crew to Mars and lots of stuff that they would need as well to spend a multi-year mission there. So yes, eventually the rocket surpasses the Saturn V in size and power to become the biggest, most powerful rocket ever. That's some years away. Again, the first version that we see is we'll launch at least the first couple of missions, and then they're still sort of working out the plans after that.
Let's talk a little bit about what's going on out at Kennedy Space Center. There's been a lot of new activities out there. Give me a sense of how many different, the impression that the world got was that the space shuttle went away and Kennedy Space Center practically closed down. That's not the case. What's going on out there?
Right. Well, as we discussed previously, there's quite a few launches going on from the area in general, a number of which NASA supports directly if they're science missions, even ISS cargo, that SpaceX is launching. SpaceX is bringing more commercial satellite launches to the area than we've seen in a long time. So there's actually quite a bit of actual launch activity taking place from the Cape side, just sort of across the border at Kennedy. It's a lot of the activity is a little bit more behind the scenes, and again, concentrated on getting a lot of these ground systems and infrastructure ready for these SLS and Orion launches. That's a launch pad, 39B, one of the high bays inside the vehicle assembly building where the rocket will be put together. The crawler transporter that used to carry Saturn Vs and shuttles is being updated to carry this new big rocket, a mobile launch tower that will roll out with it. So all that, in parallel, NASA's in the process of turning over a number of the facilities that it definitely doesn't need anymore, stuff left over from the shuttle program that it just has no use for, to new users. Often, either private companies or other government agencies. So as far as things that sort of lots of people would recognize, they include the 3 hangars where shuttle orbiters used to be stored and refurbished in between flights, processed. They're called Orbiter Processing Facilities, or OPFs. Those are all accounted for now. One has been leased to, it's a little more complicated, but the state is spending money to renovate it, modernize it. That's OPF 3.
Okay.
With the intent of leasing it to Boeing, which was one of the 2 companies along with SpaceX that NASA chose to launch astronauts under the Commercial Crew Program.
Okay.
So even before Boeing had won that contract, the intent was that they would use this hangar to assemble their crew capsule, which is called the CST-100. So still, I think lease details still to be worked out, and as we know that those contract awards themselves are actually under protest. I suppose it's conceivable that there could be a change in which Boeing didn't come out a winner, but that's the plan for OPF 3. And then in an interesting development, I guess the Air Force, Department of Defense, has taken the other 2 hangars for its military
there's like an unmanned
research
space
plane. Yeah, the X-37B is a sort of semi-classified program. Its existence is known, and its launches are disclosed, but what it actually does up in orbit is not discussed. So that hasn't happened yet. The last mission just recently landed in California. It lasted about 2 years up in orbit, which is pretty extraordinary. So the intent is that that program will move here to Kennedy, instead not only launching here, but probably landing on the shuttle runway, and again being worked on between flights, so that they'll just sort of be consolidating their operation here. So that's one group. maybe most importantly, SpaceX. NASA has leased to SpaceX Pad 39A.
That's the old shuttle launch pad that we see with the flame trench and all that, the towers and all that.
Most of the last shuttle missions that we would ever watch all were from 39A. So again, historic pad dating to the Apollo years, used for many shuttle launches, and now SpaceX is in the process of modifying that pad to support its Falcon rocket. Not only the Falcon rocket that we've seen launch, but what they call the Falcon Heavy, which has not yet launched, and they hope to launch for the first time next year, the very first launch of which would be from right here at KSC 39A. So that would be, obviously a huge event to see one of KSC's pads
now, are they
come back
thinking
to
of
life
using that?
and for this new rocket.
Are they going to use that for commercial cargo and crew missions to the International Space Station, or do they have other big things in mind for that?
Yeah, I don't think they need that type of rocket to get, the heavy version, to get a crew or cargo to the ISS, which again is not in a high orbit, but there are certain very heavy satellites that are going to very high orbits, for which that added capability would come into play. So 39, and then finally, I guess again, potentially most important, sort of over the long term, is the runway itself, the shuttle runway. There's NASA's in negotiations with Space Florida to take over the operation of that as a facility. Space Florida, in turn, will make it available to various companies. As I already mentioned, the X-37B could land there. Sierra Nevada's Dream Chaser is a shuttle, sort of a mini shuttle type vehicle.
They didn't win the contract, but that's an exciting looking little craft.
Did not win the contract, but they will be bidding to fly cargo to the station instead of crew in the near term. It could land there. Some of the suborbital space tourism vehicles, X-Corps, Lynx rocket plane already has plans to come here and do some testing. And of course, there's things like drones that I'm not sure how visible they'll be and what we'll see, but there's a lot of different activity. There's a company called Stratolaunch, backed by Paul Allen, who was the backer of Spaceship One when it won the X Prize 10 years ago. That evolved into Virgin Galactic that we're seeing, trying to work through issues now. But they also have a system with a very large mothership that, after taking off like an airplane and deploying a rocket at altitude, would come back and land on the runway. So, and there's also should have mentioned that already there's a NASA project called Morpheus, testing a prototype lander that's operating out at the runway. They set up a little patch of land there that simulates a lunar landscape. Morpheus is doing some test landings on that section, and as well a private company called Moon Express, which is a contender to win the Google Lunar X Prize, just arrived to do some tests in that area as well. So there's an interesting mix of stuff happening out there, and that sort of represents what KSC is trying to, how they're trying to transition the center as a whole into one that's obviously not just exclusively NASA programs as it was for decades, but supporting this diversity of commercial and government launches.
Yeah, in a way it's kind of cool. I mean, we know that there are some things going on out there. We know there's the commercial crew, commercial cargo, but just making some of the assets available to some of these innovators and other people and saying, come on in, bring your ideas, is kind of exciting. It might be the best thing for Brevard over the long term, is to have this experimentation going on and people seeing this as an exciting place to try their visions and try to launch.
Yeah, indeed. One of the sort of the mantra of many local officials over many years preceding the shuttle's retirement was this need to try to diversify our space program in this area and not be so dependent on one major NASA program, whether it was Apollo or the shuttle, which we obviously saw the consequences of in terms of many thousands of layoffs rather abruptly when those programs were were canceled. So the hope is that as many of these individual efforts, like Moon Express has maybe 20 people here. The whole company is maybe 50 people. So they're very small, starting out. But the more of those you can bring in, and as they grow, you get this nice mix of stuff that should hopefully make things more interesting and kind of even out the ups and downs of any one program over time.
I never would have guessed that we'd be talking about space startups 10 years ago, but that seems to be the trend here. We have just about a minute left. I know that we had there was the unfortunate crash of the Virgin Galactic craft. There's a couple here in Central Florida that still has a ticket to ride. They're still up for it.
Yeah, this couple that we met a little over a year ago, Sharon and Mark Hagel, they live in Winter Park, and they were really actually among the early group of people to sign up and commit to fly on Virgin Galactic.
Not cheap.
Not cheap at the time. The tickets were $200,000 a piece. But they believe in the program. They've been longtime supporters. They're affiliated with a foundation that is run by what they call the company's future astronauts. So I wouldn't have expected that they would suddenly back out, but clearly, the company has said they don't think many people will. This is following the accident on Halloween that killed one of Virgin's, or actually was a scaled composites test pilot. So clearly they have work to do to get ready to fly ordinary folks, if you will, like us, or those who can afford it, which they'd hope to do early next year, but they're getting a lot of support from the people who have committed money to it so far.
James, thanks for joining us here today. Good luck with the coverage, and
me.
we'll be sure to be following you at launch time. Well, that's our show for today. I'm Matt Reed. We'll see you right here next Wednesday on WEFS and FloridaToday.com.